So welcome everyone to the last talk of this 4-day virtual retreat. We've been looking into suffering and beauty, how the heart opens. No talk could make this more vividly clear than your own sitting, your own life. Every step, every breath, a full expression of the dynamic confluence, boundlessness, and intimacy, the immediacy we call the human heart. Our being and its unique flux is as interdependent in this transient world as a wave or a particle is to the looking eye. To say interconnected, even interbeing, seems tame when it comes to the miracle of a heartbeat or the mystery of how anything at all appears. Henry began yesterday with gratitude. That's the beginning, middle, and end of this practice. The Buddha called it beautiful. The whole of the teaching, right where you are. Suffering, the cause of suffering, the ending to suffering. One body. This very moment. Not the slightest gap. So today, I'd like to explore this world of suffering and beauty, of the true human heart, with a look at case 5 in the Mumonkan, or Gateless Gate, Kyogen's Man Up a Tree, or more inclusively, Person Up a Tree. This koan started to surface on Friday when Henry took us deep into the heart of awakening with case 6, Buddha holds up a flower. The Gateless Gate begins with these succinct expressions of awakening, the whole of the matter, mu, 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 dog, fox, finger, beard, flower. But in the mix, between Bodhidharma's beard and Shakyamuni Buddha's transmission, the flower, the smile, in between comes case 5, Kyogen's Person Up a Tree, the only koan we have from this master. Mumon comments in his verse to this case, Kyogen's perversity knows no bounds. Neither does his compassion. So here is the case. Master Kyogen said, "It's like a man up a tree, hanging from a branch by his mouth. His hands cannot grasp a branch. His feet won't reach a bough. Suppose there is another person under the tree who asks, what is the meaning of Bodhidharma's coming from the West? If he does not respond, he goes against the wish of the questioner. If he answers, he will lose his life. At such a time, how should he respond? End of case. Kyogen lived in the 9th century, a contemporary of Joshu and of Master Chosa. Chosa is the master who said, "You must step forward off the top of a 100-foot pole. How will you do it?" Step forward off the top of a 100-foot pole. How will you do it? First, how will you sit on top of that pole? Where is it? What is the view? Vast and clear? One boundless spaciousness? No one there, nothing at all? Out of that empty, infinite spaciousness, one step, one sound, one gesture. Chosa says, the world in 10 directions is your whole body. As Dogen put it, the entire world of the 10 directions is the true human body. In Kyogen's koan, that body is hanging by the teeth from a branch in a tree. Kyogen's story is striking and maybe more familiar than this koan. He was a brilliant intellectual, a great scholar. That was Kyogen's go-to response, his way of parsing reality, the ground he relied on. Seeing this, Isan, his last master, Isan, confronted Kyogen with the question, what is your essential face before your mother and father were born? This famous question, your original face. Isan goes on, I'm not asking you about what's recorded in or what can be learned from the scriptures. Say something from the time before your parents were born and before you could distinguish objects. I want to record what you say. This is written in the record. Kyogen couldn't say anything. He went away and sat, probably coming back to Isan, maybe again and again, trying to answer. Isan pushes him. What you are saying is something you have learned after you were born. This narrative, this construct of who you think you are, this secondhand explanation is founded on knowing. Isan asks for what Dogen calls the mind before knowing. Show me that mind, that fact, that original face. Kyogen sits and looks into it. He searches through all his books and notes for a response. Finally, he goes to Isan and begs him to just tell me. Please tell me, Master. So poignant. This idea that someone else, even a great master, could give you the answer to your most heartfelt question. Who am I? What am I? What is my true face? As Mumon says, the family treasures do not come in through the gate. How could they? If there's anything like a gate, it's you. Kyogen realizes, as he puts it, that a picture of bread can't satisfy hunger. He burns his books, goes into the mountains, and eventually settles in an abandoned hut to practice alone. The record says he tearfully left Nansen. Some 9 years in to this solitary way. And one day, sweeping the ground near his hut, a small pebble, or some accounts say a tiny bit of potsherd, flew off the broom and struck a stalk of bamboo. Kyogen suddenly experienced deep awakening. He bathed, lit incense, and bowed in the direction of Isan. The master's great compassion, says Kyogen, exceeds that of one's parents. How fitting. If you had explained it to me, I would never have known this joy. What happened? One bare sound, one encounter with beauty, with form, and Kyogen disappears. His separate self disappears. He's gone. And suddenly, the awakened world, this whole world, comes rushing in, where there was nothing at all, nothing. Suddenly, everything, just one sound. This, according to tradition, is what happened to Siddhartha Gautama, sitting, after at least 6.5 years of arduous practice, just dropping away, dropping away, dropping away, sitting in total emptiness. His eye suddenly meets the morning star. And in that moment, breaks open. Just one shining. Throughout heaven and earth, one. The Buddha later said he crossed over. Over what? Here's how Kurt Spellmeyer puts it in that article I mentioned of his. It's entitled Awakened by Beauty. He writes, Chan Zen tradition holds that on the 8th day of the 12th lunar month, Siddhartha became fully enlightened when, looking up, he beheld the morning star, redirecting his attention from emptiness back into the realm of form. He finally came face to face with the radiance of the Dharmakaya, the ultimate reality. Spellmeyer goes on, seeing wakes Siddhartha up. Even if the senses are often obstacles, just as the fire sermon claims, he does some unpacking of that sutta. The senses, they're also allies that he couldn't do without. Almost certainly the Buddha had observed the morning star many times before, but now he views it in a liberating way by becoming one with it and with everything. After that, his own sensations seem no different from the passing of the clouds and the sound of the wind, like the sensations of a single great body. And Siddhartha wasn't the only one, Spellmeyer goes on. Countless Zen stories describe practitioners making the same U-turn from emptiness to form. Suddenly turning the flower. In one account, Spellmeyer says, a disappointed monk, after decades of unsuccessful practice, leaves his monastery for a hermit's hut. Then one day, as he rakes gravel in the yard, his illusions completely dissipate when he hears a single pebble softly ping against a bamboo stalk. Make the U-turn from emptiness to form. Turning on a dime. Turning on zero. One taste of this empty, boundless reality, and the heart-rending realization, not two, no possibility of a gap. Emptiness and form, form and emptiness, even the conjugation doesn't hold up. One fact, one reality. Nagarjuna, whom we heard about yesterday, brought this home. Samsara, the illusory world of separation, craving, clinging, and suffering, that familiar, illusory world. And nirvana, the way of awakening, this way, are not two different realities. Citing Nagarjuna, David Loy says, we don't transcend this world or go somewhere else. We're talking about two ways of experiencing this world. The locus of suffering, the collection of separate things that arise and pass away, is not different from oneness, from awakening. U-turn is one way of describing that shift. Fact. Dogen called it body and mind falling away, forgetting the self, and the 10,000 myriad things, realizing you. You've not awakened the world awakens you. Like this release that Henry was talking about, that we don't make happen, and yet Kyogen heard that single sound and wrote a verse. The first line, often heard. One striking sound, and I have forgotten everything I knew. The great relief, the great forgetting. The great mystery, and yet so near. I once listened to a recording of a talk about Kyogen and Isan. The talk was in Japanese, with the expectation that there would be a short synopsis in English at the end. It's not always happens, but so sitting there listening in the wash of language, understanding nothing, suddenly, ka, ka, leaping forth, nothing but ka. That little atomic, and yet this pebble, just this little pebble. Dogen wrote, realization is intimacy with all things. That's the invitation. It's actually what we're doing. This practice realization. Forget yourself in the act of uniting with just one thing. Let yourself recede and let things as they are come near. So near. Out of the depths of his own experience, Kyogen presented his monks with this koan. It's like a person up a tree hanging from a branch by her mouth. Her hands cannot grasp a branch. Her feet won't reach a bough. Suppose there's another person under the tree who asks her, what is the meaning of Bodhidharma's coming from the West. What is the meaning, the ultimate meaning of this life? Who am I? What is it to be authentically human? Life is so precious, so fecund and generative. Why are we destroying the planet? Suffering is unbearable. How can we tolerate? Centuries of torture, abuse, and systemic oppression. How can I live with this culpability? How can I not? I'm doing this practice. What really matters? Can it be resolved? Put another way, what did Bodhidharma realize? Bodhidharma, the great sage who late in a long, long life traveled from India to China and sat facing a wall for 9 years. Sometimes this question is framed, what was his state of mind? I mean, then you have to say, what is this state of mind? What is awakening? Or the question Isan put to Kyogen, what is your true face before and beyond your conceiving? Kyogen's koan presents these questions as a matter of life and death. Suppose you have a chance to help someone who comes earnestly asking, seeking. Suppose someone's life depends on your answer. Hang by your teeth, unable to speak, or open your mouth to respond and fall. I'm reminded of a quote by the 16th century Chan master Boshan. Boldly let go on the edge of the cliff. You only revive after death. What is that edge? Is it right where we sit? Where else? And then how do we let go? What release is this? Can I trust the revival? In his book, Echo Dharma, David Loy unpacks a quote by Chögyam Trungpa that seems quite relevant to this koan and current to our condition. Here's the quote in this version. Trungpa says, enlightenment is like falling out of an airplane. The bad news is there is no parachute. The good news is there is no ground. Loy asks, helpfully, What is the airplane? What is the parachute that we don't have? And what about the groundless ground? With Kyogen, we might ask, what are we hanging on to? What is the fierce but fallible gripping by the skin of our teeth on that single isolated branch? Is falling inevitable? Is it an act of compassion? A response to the question? Might the tenuous grip itself be an act of compassion? What happens if you let go to respond? What is this falling? Can we possibly know? Loy associates the airplane with our normal way of experiencing the world, including ourselves. This me inside somewhere, and everyone else, the rest of the world outside. No wonder it's an isolated branch. We organize experience, Loy says, as a collection of separate things in objective space and time, a framework we share and tend to take for granted. Learned and arbitrary, this is our normal way of experiencing reality. The Buddha called it dukkha, suffering, dissatisfaction. Something is missing, something is not quite right. There is some seeming innate inadequacy. And the problem is not just our bodies. Loy points out that the Buddha's own story, with the final impetus for his search springing from an encounter with old age, illness, and death. Loy writes, our inability to accept our mortality is also our inability to live fully. I remember Ryan Roshi saying, if you're afraid to die, you're afraid to live. Loy adds, there are two kinds of people, dead and soon to be dead. I want to add another category. Loy continues, there's another kind of dukkha. The way we experience the airplane world is that it's a construct. Our sense of separation is a construct. It doesn't correspond to anything real. So the sense of self we have is inherently uncomfortable, anxious, insecure. We experience this as a sense of lack. Something is wrong with me. I'm not good enough. Loy goes on, our delusion of a separate self is shadowed or haunted by this sense of lack. He says, it's the parachute we lack. And then he goes on. It's so wild. The sense of lack is the parachute we lack. He talks about the lack project or the reality project, how we try to fill that hole, to shore up that insecurity, to keep ourselves afloat, or as in the koan, to hang on for dear life. It's like a person up a tree hanging from a branch by her mouth. Her hands cannot grasp a branch, her feet won't reach a bough. Someone comes asking the question, the great matter, the matter of life and death. Once in a teacher training session, I heard about a student. It was an open forum to really help train teachers. And so was shared the story of a student working on this koan who went into Doksan and showed some elaborate movement. And the Roshi said, "What are you doing?" And the student said, "I'm climbing down the tree so I can answer." It's just so like us. But that's not it. What is it to really face the koan? Face yourself. Face the one asking. What if that one is you? Dogen's koan collection, those 300 koans, the Eye of the Treasury, includes another version of this case. Kyogen said to the assembly, "What if you are hanging by your teeth from a tree on a 1,000-foot cliff with no place for your hands to hold or your feet to step on? All of a sudden, someone asks you the meaning of the ancestors coming from India. If you respond, you will lose your life. If you don't respond, you do not do justice to the question. You do not match the question." At just such a moment, what would you do? Just such a moment is this moment. What are you holding on to? Really? What if we let go completely? Kyogen is trying to rid us of all concepts, all delusions or devices, all our illusory defenses. Illusory. What are you holding on to? In his commentary on the case, John Dido-Lori inserts these interjections. You and the questioner hang from the same tree. And then Kyogen makes sure this is indeed a question of life and death. And at the last, if you truly wish to understand the teaching of the Zen school, you need to see into it here. Nagarjuna expresses that fundamental teaching. of the Zen school. In the unity, this absolute insoluble unity of samsara and nirvana. They are one. One heart. Broken all the way. All the way open. Reading Nagarjuna, Carlo Rovelli says to recognize this, to realize this utter interpenetration, this is how he puts it, is liberation and beatitude. Beatitude as in blessing or bliss or beauty with no opposite. This seamlessness. Kyogen's koan doesn't expound, however beautifully. It calls on language of a different order, with the open invitation, the absolute command to be the fact. Be the koan. How will you show it? Convey it. Embody it. The whole of the teaching. Suffering, the cause of suffering, the ending to suffering. Hanging from a tree, nowhere to grasp, one all-pervading reality, insubstantial. And yet, or will you fall? If falling, will the release we cannot ourselves make happen give way? There's more than one koan about falling in this tradition. Falling from a tree, falling into a well, the bottom of the barrel falling out. The good news is there's no ground. There is no ground. At the same time, if you hit the ground, when you hit the ground, instead of getting up, just stay there for a moment. This human frailty, this fact, the humility, the reality, the beauty of things as they are. In the version of this koan in Dogen's collection, there's another scene. Then Senior Monk Koto came out. here's the scene, and said, "Master, let's not talk about being in a tree, but tell me what happens before climbing the tree." Kyogen burst into laughter. Such a severe master and such joy, having fallen completely, total freedom. And the freedom to face us with this koan. Hanging from a tree by the skin of your teeth, Mumon asks, how will you give life to those who have been dead? How will you respond? What will you offer? What will you realize? Mumon also asks, how will you put to death those who have been alive? How will you cut off the death-dealing delusions that divide the world into a calculus of good and bad, inside and out, self and other, even life and death? How will you see through the sense of separation that we somehow think is our natural state of being? If you're practicing with Mu, let Mu breathe. Let Mu walk. Let Mu occupy everything. Lose yourself in Mu. Let Mu melt the construct, that I, me, mine. Let Mu dissolve any trace of what might seem like separation. Or if you're just sitting, rest in that completely, thoroughly alive. No one doing anything. Or if you're counting, let each single count be the only number. Fully absorbed, coming back again and again. However you go at it, it's your whole body. You cannot fall out of it. Kyogen swept the ground, and in a flash, a single pebble flying off the broom put everything to rest. And brought the whole world to life. One strike and everything I knew forgotten. One sound. In this great freedom, in this boundless compassion, in gratitude beyond words. Just one more word. The whole verse is 2 stanzas, and there's a very short story. Here's the verse. One strike and all knowledge is forgotten. No more the mere pretense of practice, transformed to uphold the ancient path, not sunk in idle devices. Far and wide, not a trace is left. The great purpose lies beyond sound and form. In every direction, the realized way, beyond all speech, the ultimate principle. No wonder we hear just the first line. When Isan receives this, his Dharma brother, Kyogen, is standing there beside him. Isan gets the verse from Kyogen, and he is delighted, absolutely approving. But Kyogen wants to go check. He goes to Kyogen. And when he asks about the world that Kyogen has seen, Kyogen recites this verse. And Kyogen responds, he counters. This verse could be composed from the things you've studied earlier. So familiar. If you've had an experience, Kyogen says, say something more. Say it now. So Kyogen composes this verse. Suddenly recall the infinite wealth Henry spoke of these last 2 days. Here's the new verse. Last year's poverty was not real poverty. This year's poverty is finally genuine poverty. In last year's poverty, there was still ground where I could plant my hoe. In this year's poverty, not even the hoe remains. Abundant poverty. Kyogen approves, but he pushes just a little more. He pushes. Show me this living reality, ephemeral, luminous, and empty, where even emptiness is empty. And Kyogen writes, I have a function. It's in the twinkling of an eye. I've got to stop, so no more unpacking. This function, this twinkling of an eye, everywhere functioning. Suffering, seeing, responding, practicing. This whole body. The twinkling of an eye. Already gone. And right here. Thank you so much for your long listening and for this shared practice.